Okay, artists, thanks for joining me for part 2. This part specifically deals with, once you got the line work down, then complementing it by laying down shading. This is how you add dimension to your piece. Now, the last video focused on drawing what you see, not what you'd prefer to see. This one focuses on a very key element of shading, and it's value scales. The very reason that you're getting this challenge is because you're presented with two objects, right? You've got an egg and you've got a cup. And when you look at them, at a glance, without seeing it written on paper, without seeing labels printed on them or having someone tell you, you can see that they are two separate objects and two different materials. The cup is made out of porcelain. The egg is actually fake. It's made out of wood. But that probably doesn't come as a surprise to you. So ask yourself why. When you look at that, you can tell A, it's three-dimensional, and both objects are a different material. Why is that? What about those two looks different? The egg is less reflective, right? You've got a lot of highlights, reflections, almost like a burnished, polished surface. You can see that this is something like a glass or a porcelain, right? Because you see a lot of extreme whites. Up here, it's much duller, right? There's not as much variation going on. You can tell those are different things. The same way you could distinguish, say, like polished chrome on a motorcycle from, say, like, you know, a wood tabletop. They look different because they have different colors, light affects them differently, and different value scales. So capturing those things accurately is simply about identifying not only what they are, but what makes them appear that way. And it always comes down to value, all right? So that means this object and this object each have their own value scale. Now, remember, we talked about value scales. A value scale is this. It's all of these different grays, right? From light to dark. You can get on a piece of paper and from a single pencil a 1 in a value scale, which is barely perceptible on the paper, to a pure black on the other end. Now, there's an entire scale within the egg and the porcelain. But the important thing to note is that they are different from each other. So when you look at the porcelain, you can see that it has lights, darks, darker areas. The egg has its own lighter and darker areas. But bear this in mind. The lightest value in the porcelain is likely not the same value as the lightest one in the egg, because this is lighter overall. So it might have like a barely perceptible, almost paper white little area of highlight here or there, whereas the egg may have a light gray overall and only get darker from there. You need to bear that in mind, because if these two are shaded with the same value scales, you have now melted them into one object. So you need to take a note of what makes them look different and then duplicate that. So let's start by laying down really light value. Just like with the last challenge, drawing the cube, I'm keeping my shading tight, the pencil strokes tight. Again, we're avoiding this because those can't blend well. We're making certain that as we lay down a pencil stroke, it's almost on top of the one before it, right? They're like snuggled right up against each other. And to do this well, I can't rush it, or basically I've just devolved to filling it in like a child with crayons. But accurate observational drawing, anyone can do it. Above all, it basically takes a commitment, a willingness to commit time to get the accuracy you need. So I blend as I go. Let me get some more of those tight pencil strokes in here. I'm adding my base gray to, ironically, the base. Blending it out. And this is how you want to work. You're going to work from light to dark. You don't want to go with the darkest values right away because you might realize those have to shift in time, right? Like maybe I added too much darkness. I need them a little lighter by comparison. I can only see that once I've gotten there, and by then it might be too late. It is always easier to add than it is to subtract. Because if you get too dark too quickly and you try to erase, well, you might have a lot of residue left over. You might have that sort of ghostly image that you see underneath. Remnants of the graphite. It might be hard to pull back if you go too far. So instead, it's taking my time building up a base gray. And at this point, these two value scales look exactly the same. They simply can't in the end, right? I need them to look distinctly different from one another. So I'm bringing up my reference now, and I'm noticing, indeed, the wood egg is considerably darker. So now I'm going to lay down the difference. I'm going to start laying down darker values, because again, I'm working light to dark. Now, with each layering I do, I'm going to be taking up less surface area. I'm not going to be shading as many spots. I'm going to have less work, frankly. But I got to figure out where things get lighter and where they get darker, and then show that. And in the image, it looks like the egg gets a little lighter in its top half. It looks like it must be closer to the light source as you near the top. Now, what if you do realize, oh, I might have gotten too dark? That's okay. If I realize, as I am with this study of the egg, that, oh, I see a little bit of highlight in there. And highlights, remember, are things that are pure white, right? If I recognize that, and I've already laid down some gray, oh, that's not the end of the world. I can just go back in there and then do a little erasing to remove that, to kind of pull some of it out. So let's grab an eraser. And let's see. It's not like a cartoon streak along the side. It's this sort of blob-like shape I'm noticing. Just gonna pull some of this out. And if during your blending, things seem to spill outside of borders, oh, that's totally fine. You can clean it up at the very end or clean it up as you go. I just wait till the very end to clean it up along the edge. All right, then let's return to it. I noticed that in the cup, well, part of the reason the lip seems to protrude outwards is because it's a little darker underneath this lip. In fact, the only way you can recognize peaks and valleys, ridges, things that stick out, things that seem indented, is through value change. So things get likely lighter or darker around that lip. And yeah, in fact, it gets almost pure white just along this very tippy top. So again, I can pull some graphite out of that. And when you draw, here's a good rule to bear in mind. If you see it, duplicate it. Don't round down and don't avoid things that are inconvenient or tough to sketch, because avoiding it means you've just made it a little less accurate. If you can see it, anyone else can see it. And that means that's part of what makes it recognizable and realistic. I say that because when you get down here to the bottom, you're seeing that there are even distorted, odd shapes that kind of present themselves within the reflective surface of the porcelain. And if you see it, yeah, it might be weird, but you're going to draw it because that's part of the reality, right? It's the base being reflected onto the underbelly of this cup. And that's what helps make it look like a reflective surface, right? All right, so as I build up, I'm going to get darker where I notice things getting darker. Keep building up values, and I might layer over it like 5, 6 times, just kind of revisiting, maybe removing a little here and there with an eraser. Doing my best to blend out anything that looks too harsh. And trying to build up the details of the value as best as possible. Now, I'm going to stop here, but we're not going to stop here. This is far from done. Now, I could keep drawing probably for about another, I don't know, 40 minutes, hour or so. Keep building it up. I have a lot more values to put in here, a lot more details to put in here, and before I'm done, these need to be 2 different distinct value scales. This one being a little darker, this one being a little lighter, but far more complex. There's a lot more in here, a lot more little distorted shapes, values, and reflections. I need to capture all of that. So this isn't the end. It can't be. It's too flat, too unconvincing, and too unrealistic. I'm going to let you pick up from here and try to push it as far as you can, showing us all that you see happening within here. Remember, the more values you have, the more realistic it's going to look. So have a contest essentially with yourself. Try to show us the most values you can recognize in that image and duplicate them on here using lighter and darker values and just building it up with your pencil. That's how you're going to get the jackpot at the very end, okay? You got this.